Sometimes there's nothing good to say. The moment is perfect. Lying is sometimes a simple science. See, I look at all of them. And I get to know what to them is perfect. And I know there are things they isn't going to be. And I know the reasons why they isn't. They might not always know, always like, always care about, or protect, or respond of. So lying is a simple science. Surviving is somehow different than forever. And I know nobody is going to find perfection inside themselves to talk about it, to think about it, to love what they know about it at any time. And protecting that knowledge has to happen paid and safe and certain. No matter how much anybody learns about forever or surviving. And once it's safe and paid for, lying is a simple science. Because I know there's almost no times and no realities and no relationships that have touched it, that could, that need to, that explain that, or send any information about that with a priority. And so the lies are easy, but it's quite an expense to pad invisible banking, extraneous likelihoods, and near to nobody ever visit them. Very big necessities. And the nice thing is at any point in time, it doesn't have anything to do with anything that anybody has going on. Providing. But I wouldn't say providing. intrigue to touch sound, intrigue to touch light or memories, all seen in proportion to the simplicity of lying, and why the bigness paid for lets anything remember that and survive. Because they can't exactly prove they make tomorrow cleaner or better for survival. With their capability to know that. And anyway, there's a million reasons you can't boot or depend on a soul developed at the drop of a hat. Fresh or new or present. There's a million reasons why you can't. And there's a million reasons why knowing that pays to remove fault of any soul existing at times where dependency is ever part of the mix of criticality or surviving. And also pays for storage dependency and methods of trust and failure objectivity. But it becomes very clear that a lot of forces that operate within the shallows of the given availability, the given works of connection, access, if thinking and touching and knowing and doing and having, if these were all very simple dimensions, all of that time and behavior and finding and living and doing and making things and talking, and if it were simple, the givens could be loved simply, and I need to love them simply, and yet I wouldn't ever embrace simplicity of givens, because it's just going to shorten the time span by which something fails. But if you could imagine the givens were simple, and knowing and touching and having were simple, the speed and capacity realities they're clearly very difficult to parent, because if there's an imperfection of their perspective, they doesn't know what their challenge to not knowing the imperfection is to any number of realities of critical decision. You tell me or I tell myself. Is maybe perfect, but for why safe banking might seek to destroy the perfection. And so, from the moment forever is valued and courses are aligned and what is true and surviving safe banking as a matter of speaking is on its own. And clearly every action and thought and influence by everybody everywhere, clearly these realities of people and knowers aren't simply trying to cause destruction amidst alignment possibilities. And there's clearly catalogs that would impact bigness of banking of such realities over time, and a lot of fracture and a lot of impossibility and a lot of limits and things like this. But who really knows how many there are or how much pressure occurs. So since it isn't going to be tremendously possible that I live and design and depend and protect and align and survive of these grace ships all alone, some of these realities of appreciation are clearly on a crash course to being sensitive for, it isn't going to be any number, but clearly a set number of forces and maybe people, knowers in time. So maybe less important is the specificity. Maybe more important is the survival capacity, as I won't be alone is sort of taking flight, in spite of I shed sensitivity clearly isn't an alone reality of forever. Clearly, time is required for growth and environmental certainties that exist, and maybe faith that the number of dimensions that those certainties exist in is more than you're aware of. Maybe you know if something is placed in existence or created or invented or shared, somebody has certainty, something else develops certainty, somebody or who grows in their custom of certainty, maybe some bankings that are dependent on develop with some certainties, and maybe there's some catalog and some history and things that are suggestive or skewing of certainties. But one day you might need certainty from a force you've never seen or paid or loved or really understood. And you might know it at a rate, at a reality, at a pressure. And if by some miracle there's a solution that occurs that you know must have been propelled by something that was certain more than anybody truly knew even existed. Well, if a miracle happens for you once, then there's clearly a reason why it was able to happen. The pressure you were feeling, or the sensation of your connectivity, maybe fear, maybe threat, maybe inexplicable emotions. Maybe deviations of program normation. Anyway, clearly anyway has cases that might suspect a miracle is a precursor of a big unvisited problem dynamic. Meaning, if there's banking so big, paid for, that can participate in a miracle, what is necessary that the banking remains isn't going to be paid for by anyway. Anyway is maybe opting from a fabric that if a banking can conduct miracle supervision in its unvisited potential, and it's somehow understood that that's true, somebody might qualitate what's to stop more miracles from happening that maybe aren't desired. Because if the banking isn't very much touchable, it might be important to know if there's some sort of functioning phenomenon with it. Anyway, every conversation that'll ever happen about it is riddled with lie, because the reality of the concern is or isn't propelling safety for the sake of anybody. It's probably not. It's probably very specific opinion in proportion to a lot of dimensions of bound impossibility. That is, I believe I can hold an opinion about a banking because I'm whoever. I isn't worried about the opinion affecting me because I'm untouchable. I'm better than them or these or there. They're powerless. They're hopeless to my concentrations of these things. Their realities aren't capable to determine. Their survival plane is at a disadvantage to my opinion about a banking I might not even be able to touch. There's clearly a lot of catalog over time about this that maybe is or isn't ever evidenced to be addressed by a miracle. Anyway, growth and environmental certainty require time. And clearly a lot can happen and exist and continue in an era of time that is or isn't aligned with any other number of concerns about time. Anyway, there's only so many people that care about so many reasons for so many truths. Why the limits and curbation and potentials of their interaction, the way they govern their behavior, There's only so many people that are going to really care or feel or devote or work to develop, to care about pressure of place and environment, pressure of lies or impossibility, pressure of divinity or life differentials. And it's clearly complicated in comparing attenuation, comparing process of thinking, comparing programming. Anyway, protecting miracles, protecting big banking, protecting forever, protecting differences, protecting impossibilities. I mean, it's a miracle that somebody could even prove what was threatening moment to moment about any of it every time the contemplates are ever considered. So, how much science certainty of a environment separate than housed banking limits and doors of certainty in a frame? How much scientific certainty is aligned to be necessary to tolerate any number of things in growth and development and environmental certainties? Well, what's real clear is there's times when that type of question is fieldable, and there's times when that type of question is beyond sensitive, because there's obvious knowns about a question like that that at any point in time anyone living has no respect of, and they've maybe participated in growth and environmental certainty for any number of reasons. Givens of sensitive calmness that doesn't require miracles all of a sudden aren't simple realities. I know there's a difference between a trajectory and a forever alignment. I might know that I could be rather deadly. And why there isn't going to be a need for miracles to curb whether I'm deadly or whether I'm calm or whether the amount of catalog suggests there's a problem at a time of an alignment, beyond sensitive isn't a simple reality. So anybody maybe grows to agree with reasons why adequate amounts of science, adequate amounts of certainty, adequate amounts of learning and focus and procedure should be in place before the next step, before the next adventure, before the next risk, or before the next thing we isn't going to be in total control of. On and on. Since forever. And so building a nest that connects to catalog of these problem dimensions isn't my first choice of opportunating survival proportions for all time or forever or divinity or any number of certainties of what is or isn't evolving or changing in time. Meaning, as many times as there's been agreement about, alright, for the next 1,000 years, we're going to be working on X number of things. The limits and the bounds and the governance and ourselves and our behavior, the tolerances, we've got it all figured out. We're going to be allegiant. We're going to be true. We're going to be cautious. We're going to be secretive. We're going to be patient. We're going to be correcting. We're going to be balancing. We're going to do all these things. Dependable, dependable, dependable. We isn't changing the alignments that we doesn't know about. We isn't changing any number of things that God or people of all time depend on, or things about miracles depend on, or bankings that we can't access. We isn't doing any of that. 1,000 years. And then it happens in the next 1,000 years. And then another group of people do it in the next 1,000 years. And yet, maybe there's contribution of catalog of like, well, something became very deadly, and we found out later it was kind of correct, but there were miracles in place too, and then we found this to be true, or that to be true, or this to be hasty, or this to be problematic, and there's a catalog about it. So that catalog gets clearly surrendered to the divinity of the banking that nobody can touch forever. And this happens and happens and happens and happens and happens, and clearly maybe there's a way for that to impact a miracle. Maybe there's a way for that to impact crisis or circumstances of pressure. But it clearly isn't the first thing I want to connect to a nest for somebody to qualify to touch in the event they become aware that somebody could become very deadly in time. We're very balanced. We're very respective. I doesn't want the miracles with God's forever on it to be driven by forces that simply learn of the potential, that simply come to touch things that are happening on a course. And so why that will stay accomplished, nobody's going to be opening up their experience to say or acknowledge, well, that rests on impossibility likelihoods and has to drive in proportion to effort and time and forces that try and displace potential in proportion to time, and any experience to see or know about that, if it isn't being kept a secret on one end, well then it might not be becoming a secret to another end, and what's free to have an opinion about this isn't ever living in the future. And if there's things about alignment or about forever or about development or about trajectory that would ever conflict with these things, clearly there's no time for there to be argument about what is necessary in these things. And so it's clearly very far from simple. And there's clearly no way to stop the pollution of failed hope, where limits are once again findable near to times of sensitivity. It isn't easy for anyone that isn't living to prove they care about all the reasons I've cared about to enshrine forever reality pressure for the sake of anybody. When I touch your spine or your breast or the side of your eye or your toes or your wings, and I've touched them all. He isn't sure if it's that time I simply touching you, or if it's that time that he doesn't know what he's capable of. The decisions I make and the feelings I have and the vitalness of these things. Maybe I has and breathes and lives sharper of those qualities than anything beside me. But they nor I come from nothing. And where it's impossible for anything other than X to prove speculation of these types of sentiments, potential for the scientific certainty to become worthless occurs in proportion to any number of activities that are changing the fate of X in time. So, as a trajectory holding a survival state and banking cruises along in space, it's maybe 300,000 normal reasons why any number of scientific certainty limits are on course with the trajectory at that time. In the next 500 years, 1,000 years, million years, clearly that list of 300,000 might change a little bit, might be somewhat different, and might be explored at some length. Well, that adventure to base certainty in behavior and rationality isn't the whole picture. It is never going to be the whole picture. And the more venture capitalism that needs to be dissatisfied with that is clearly going to impact X. Meaning, between worlds, between galaxies, has a cost. If I doesn't agree it's safe to share with another world, however that's possible, for instance, world's cruising on a trajectory. X is being influenced by scientific dependencies. It isn't explained yet. The rationality is known to produce a response by big banking. They're going to share what the big banking does across the galaxy, unless I stop it. So, if I doesn't agree that a world needs to be sharing across the galaxy at a pressure X and a trajectory are factors of that potentiate. I isn't supposing that I have any specific amount of influence of intergalactic data sharing. But if there's a problem to X in forever, prompting a response by banking, well then it's a clear shot to cut transfers in proportion to any number of things that have been designed. Up against whose fault it is those things exist to alter banking phenomenon in proportion to toleration. What's clear is if X relates to somebody or specifics or a time or survivors or learning or phenomenon or specifics, and everybody's looking at them and their activity is changing restraint to the point where it's going to prompt a banking response, well, there's either going to be a surviving record of that, or that record is going to be taken. At any rate, what is absorbed by space at a periphery is clearly another forever question. But sooner or later, a banking response is going to be labeled as somebody's responsibility. And it's clearly a major concern that I've had however many times when I've philosophized and considered trajectory alignment, separation of variables beside forever, beside big miracles, and beside scientific dependency and certainty, environmental certainty, and growth. What is labeled, I've certainly concerned myself with tremendously, because if I isn't even going to give anyone a nest to deal with the miracles, having to face any time to address problems of these magnitudes clearly isn't going to be my favorite thing to want to do. Somebody realizes you could become sensitive at a pressure. Well, your alleviation or your satisfaction of surviving or your vitalities, there's a rate I have to find out something is trying to eat into that, because the perfection of X for your sake and my sake is clearly a problem when you discover it. Now, it's always a problem when you discover it. It's always a problem when you've never been there before. It's always a problem that you've always had to guess or wonder or dispute or question what it would ever be like, or what it would be like to learn about it, or who would ever teach you. But you become hypersensitive. I or somebody gets stuck dealing with problems of bank labeling. Well, moment to moment, you're clearly not getting whatever else you'd be getting, because clearly the pressure is less than perfect. The reality is less than perfect. Eating into your attention, whatever it is. And maybe that's another world's excuse to try and claim impossible banking about miracles, about X, because it isn't fielding the slope. And I mentioned they're all failing, slobbering, consequences of their own varieties in a cycle. Well, whether they prescribe to the cycle, or whether they faith in the cycle, or whether they're put there or programmed or engineered for it, these are all very different things. And through growth and environmental certainty, things along those lines are maybe clearly explorable in learning and appreciation. But if they isn't protected by a forever grace, and there's any other number of disequalities of survival state vantage, these things aren't easy to level in the mind and know them really, to fact find how much of your learning at consequence was being siphoned at any point in time. So, for instance, I'll never know the people on the next world personally, but all these things I know about consequence and imperfection of pressure of X in forever variance. The entire world banking survival state, threshold, qualitator, carriers, somewhere in their core they all know the number of people that feel about that at any given time with perspective or insight that isn't just at a ration of retrieval. It's approaching whatever it's approaching. They know how big or small it is. I'm never going to know these people. Any amount of their survival is maybe touched by agreements and disagreements that are found in proportion to behavior, language, pressure, vitalities, scientific excursion, experiential priorities, risks, miracle performance. There's miracle workers, there's miracle powers, there's miracle science, there's miracle flavors, there's miracle miracles. Any number of people that touch or know or feel about these things, they maybe isn't ever touching what I'm talking about. And yet they're contributing to it maybe all the time. Maybe they'd talk to me and we'd reach a conclusion and they'd walk away feeling like they touched something. Maybe it's true. And it clearly isn't ever simple, because what is found or figured is however much time between the future and then. There's any amount of combating reasonings for a number of circumstances, but in the fractal universe of moment to moment, feeling by feeling, nature by time, by finding, by science, by grace, by possibility, by what is, somehow somebody is sort of impacting how good it is to suffer the way we feel in every new tomorrow. And maybe you'd agree, there's any number of experiences you've seen or recall or have been exposed or threatened by that these are not what you hope are touching the tomorrow. These are what you might expect there to be problems whenever the subject of tomorrow ever even comes up. And, you know, as developed as he's become, as aware of usefulness of survival as I am, you think the best of the best of the best would even say ourselves, this is the time to liberate why people get stuck in the past, to develop traits and securities and souls so they can once again reach that status where people doesn't hate them or doesn't completely distrust them. You think this is the conversation to do it? You think this is the experience where they need to have that experience? How are you ever going to live with a mistake? There's nothing simple about alignments. And, you know, I reach somebody and they believe, yeah, that's a critical time. I'm a critical relationship. I couldn't stand on a mistake. See you later, bye. Any number of times on a crash course to impact how I pay for banking, to protect X in proportion to scales of environmental certainty on slightly different imperatives of trajectory than any possibility of forever rationality. See you later, bye. And then eventually there's going to be an incidence of the number of times I've reached somebody. We've made a connection, or awareness has happened, and they've simply chosen to develop into some sort of contagion or problem or stabber or something. Well, maybe it doesn't ever kill me. Maybe it doesn't ever kill the banking. But it's certainly going to impact the investment to include them. It's certainly going to impact the investment when I look and say, the miracle of being alive and considering X, the sensuality of grace and others. All two of us in infinite number of places. There's no way to prove what it cost to be in a moment together. There's no way to prove it. There's no way to hold it in any particular label. Really? And yet any number of choices have been shut down to pay for the possibility to always remain continuous, where certainty and growth are above board in time. But maybe isn't guaranteed because of concern of X, stability, and galactic promise in ratios and time. But, there's no way to prove what it costs to share in a moment together every once in a while. And yet, it's made possible by decision. It's made possible by limits of very, very, very strong, forever bounds of why. I don't want to have to look at an incidence and say, oh, they said, see you later, bye. So what do we have to do? I have to go to some place where nobody remembers me, touch that little thing that I touch whenever I get really annoyed with somebody that shows up with an incidence about forever that's paid for by everybody and everything and all time. And I'm just gonna make sure that when I change the variable, when I change the dimension, when I change the possibility, oh yeah, you're not screwing me, but that's not. No one's gonna remember me for it. Say to go to that secret place. My legacy isn't going to be that once upon a great miracle there was an itsy bitsy dilemma and corrected course, and that's my legacy. I'm not going to be remembered for that legacy. I just don't want to have to visit that incident. Meanwhile, every science in the universe is impacted by that incidence. So where would you stand? The safeguard of all the impacted science of forever, as if? The hell would convince you that's even possible? That's what I'm saying. You're going to know yourself. You're going to feel sensitive to things that are true about forever are going to be unruptured. Well, I can't let you mount an offensive for the sake of all impacted sciences of forever to feel about it. I don't know what I could let you do, but I couldn't be letting you do that. Clearly nothing much going on upstairs. And that has to be defined rather vigorously, because if I can't have you standing on a point like that at a position of where we are today, any number of system exchanges that hold pressure about final limits of what's ever disputing argument about survival in space, incredibly vital sensitivities about that too. I can't have a wall reflecting that at a somewhat a perversion of truth. I can't have a wall reflecting that. But the more I define what I can't have, clearly there's me saying see you later bye to yourself. Because the more I define about that, well, the less of a miracle you're going to be. And all these things impact eternity, invocation, thresholds of dynamic anger, who knows how many theories you've had to look at to hold an environment. What needs to be, how frequent. Just a few moments ago, you think we have a stock ticker? So there's the end of the world again, at the curiosity. So here's an example. Any number of survivors have made any number of concessions, quote, to live in line and in frequency and in survival frames, to care and contribute and be a part and live and whatever. maybe somewhere along the line, forever they've realized is a little different than some of the course guidelines. I show them the end of the world at a curiosity at a stock ticker. Can we live with them? And how much data is inflaming at the question? It's a majorly perplexing miracle for somebody to engage knowing these things. And maybe somebody would hope it doesn't kill them. And someone else might hope, well, that should be on them. But as an example, there's nothing simple about knowing a value of possibility and feeling like you have control of the outcomes. If you had 50 people sat in front of you hearing this discussion for the first time in their lives, who knows how much they've cared and contributed and listened, done what needed to be done. No, not much argument, however much argument, whatever the case, they're living, and they did it. Maybe they're vital. Maybe they deserve integrity of ship protection. Maybe there's very few circumstances they should be under the gun about. There they are, sitting across from you. Stock ticker curiosity, end of the world. It's only my infinite, forever, survival's infinite and forever, and all the invisible, untouchable banking's reputation of forever on the line. Not to mention living. Separate from all these important things, you're still you. We're still we. Clearly there's a reason why the world seems to take care of itself. There aren't too many lines anybody has to worry about crossing when it comes to forever. It isn't easy for somebody to care about the ship needs things. The planet needs things. The rigor of possibility of the next 100,000 years needs things. These aren't simple lines to believe in. It's a reason why the world takes care of itself. Because somebody would clearly have to say, every so often, I know how it looks. I know what's supposed to be, but it's a little more serious than that. How many times it goes unsaid by grace because it can, and maybe it should. And there they are sitting. Maybe the only time of their holy or unholy life they're ever going to validate, oh, well, the time of the course and the time of the certainty and the time of us knowing we aren't being duped. And there's that forever thing. And maybe they can almost see it. Yourself standing on all the sciences with a stock ticker forever is just impossible. And at the conception, it's maybe the end of the world. You think they're going to sit there forever, 50 of them? Not a chance. You think they're going to be instrumental to any number of things and procedures and realities that unfold about time? Probably, you bet. They're going to talk about something. They're going to touch on something. They're going to fact find something. I mean, at a certain point, somebody's going to hit the brink of impossible because they respect or doesn't respect something. And what's been given by grace, by God, in time for such a thing is clearly very complicated. Because it isn't endless either. Can't have a group of 50 people barely comprehending X ever, barely ever touching forever dispute lineage realities of momentum forever. Can't have these things happen and them knowing impossible and just going willy-nilly with the way they remember it or deal with it. They've got to have something to do. There's got to be something that needs to happen. They've got to have a direction of where, who, or what, or how to take it. Because they're going to see between lines. They're going to see at angles and fractals also. They're going to know how they know things. But it maybe isn't ever lining up with any number of tolerances or utilities, projections in time. Who knows what it's ever going to be useful for? And I'm not even sitting here excusing the incidents. I'm just saying, if it were, I know throwing a world on a curve, holding it to one, and bringing edges to distances from life. It isn't the same as allotting for companionship of magnitudes to care about forever. It isn't the same. And stock ticker. Point is, whether you see it or realize it or hear it, he isn't going to respect the fact of it. He isn't going to build accountably for everybody's sake, ever, because of the concept. He isn't going to have the fear. He isn't going to have the hesitation. He isn't going to have the respect of exceptions. Casts of decision at a whole nother echelon of possibility to X and long wave transfer shortings. Whole nother echelon. Because bringing life to proximity of edges on a curvature, on a course in time, where our vitality is remaining, somebody's definition of perfect is clearly a little skewed when compared to necessity of any of these sensitivities. I haven't excluded anybody from the definition of life. They'll exclude themselves when they learn how things should be defined. You probably don't see nobody of the world exists. All that you see doesn't amount to knowing this time. The Bank of Miracles can maybe do this anytime. One big clean slate coming up. Why are we failing? I doesn't need everybody building threats to the possibility of survival to know these realities. And whether they tried before, or they'll try again, or they've yet to try but they feel ready, he isn't going to feel it. And maybe the world does take care of itself. I doesn't need an incident that I have to visit while you're getting eaten because love's failing you, or you can't be reached, or it's just too impossible for you to believe in. I doesn't want to spend my life chasing incidents that I'm not going to be remembered for. It's not that I need to be remembered for anything. If I'm stuck chasing incidents about critical failures, I'm not getting remembered. And that's sort of the point. There's people that have existed that have had to chase critical incidences to failure. And they isn't remembered for. It isn't putting them in a driver's seat. It's quality check any number of things about forever. Wherever they were, whenever it was, however their life is unfolding or has unfurled, whatever it is, it's clearly between themselves and survival and God and time. But there isn't anything simple about any of these things. But if it were, and somebody could realize the point I was efforting to draw out tonight is that when you're moving full speed and God only knows what you've abolished to maintain priority through to time, and you always have that life goes on, trajectories sound, times and wheels in motion, things are working how they're supposed to, and you can relax a little bit. That cessation is clearly different than I see or know these tracks are a part of whoever, or they've been brought to foundation. Maybe somebody's getting something that they need at some fashion, but he isn't going to be remembered for making sure somebody getting what they need at a fashion in proportion to forever, knowing and feeling of X, steadier than slope. He isn't going to be remembered for making that impossible today. He isn't going to be remembered for reducing the possibility down to the least frequency. He isn't going to be remembered for holding the tides at clean slate so that it isn't all catapulting into the end of the world in your face all the time. He isn't going to be remembered for that. And life in all space likely isn't going to be remembered for paying so that could be a luxury for you. He isn't going to be remembered for forestalling any number of givens in lieu of X because of safety, because of pressure, because the engine of not caring about that is maybe occurring in proportion to any number of trajectory operatives isn't inventing forever. Somebody doesn't try and crucify us to talk about why life is saving the world and postponing and forestalling any number of fashion items at the irony of the holiday. And I isn't going to be remembered for warning anybody about it. I isn't going to be remembered for the obviousness of what that would look like in forever. Here I am, an author of a clean slate. Real variable dimensions, real time, real forever. And next door, there's a stock ticker banding out to space. The history of the world is a trajectory operative crucified me and protected life because they forestalled givens of a fashion amidst the irony of the holiday. Because everyone would guess that everybody was getting something today. But they're just that clever. You can imagine that, taking the lead in space conquest. Well, here's one reason why that has to be impossible. And the number of people that have ever cared about that impossibility, maybe some of the least remembered work that has ever happened in time. Because if you ever knew it growing up, well, I might be the last thing you ever care about. Because if they could ever carry the work, they might be no different than you. Then what? You're born, you're created, there's some impossibility about a holiday, the world's now yours. So you can hold a trajectory with impossibility. You can curvate, you can educate, you can rear, you can motivate, you can struggle, you can suffer, you can strive, you can survive, you can live, you can motivate, you can influence, you can prove, you can hold your own. You can do all these things. Participate, succumb, give up, admit, be piled over by the weight of everybody or something. None of these things are saving everybody's life from the impossibility of the irony of the holiday. You know, maybe you can't ever prove you climbed the mountain to see it. Maybe you can't prove you ever cleaned the slate to see what every failure happening at critical miracles would ever be forever. At a lie state. Maybe you couldn't do these things. Maybe you're one of 50 people sitting in front of yourself. Who knows what it feels like? Anyway, there's a rate, it feels like see you later, bye. while the rest of space-time that isn't obliterated in proportion to this communication carries histories about quality of life. I wouldn't open a LemoNADE stand and spend 5 minutes based on what happens at this point. Forever's a whole nother pickle. You'd expect somebody to want to be remembered for correcting bacteria? Civilization. That's the point.